The Acolyte is a live-action Star Wars show created by Leslye Headland with an all-star cast. The synopsis reads, an investigation into a shocking crime spree pits a respected Jedi Master, Li Jung-jae, against a dangerous warrior from his past, Amanda Stenberg. As more clues emerge, they travel down a dark path where sinister forces reveal all is not what it seems. The Acolyte is billed as a show that you don't need to do any Star Wars homework to watch this show. But to set the scene, is this takes place 100 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. It is at the tail end of what is called the High Republic era. The High Republic era was supposed to be the golden age of the Jedi. So how did the Jedi go from the High Republic era to what we see in the prequels? There's a High Republic book series where we see the Jedi as what they should be. The Acolyte will give us a glimpse into that transitional period. During the High Republic era, there were factions that came out against the Jedi. They basically saw a monolith of Force users taking ownership of the Force. And that is really where the jumping off point of this show is. Now, this is your spoiler warning. From this point forward, we will be talking spoilers, so go watch it and then come back. So the first episode starts off with an action scene, and we get introduced to what we think is our main antagonist. And the first fight scene is pretty good, and of course we get Carrie-Anne Moss as a Jedi, and that's been something I didn't know I wanted to see for a long time. And it was a good fight, however, it was disappointing to see Carrie-Anne Moss die at the end of it. Although I knew they were going to do it based on the previews, I didn't want to see it. Because honestly, 8 episodes of this would make me happy. But it really did set the stage for this character. And they really did create a lot of interesting visuals with this fight scene, not just the fighting, but the surroundings. We get to see Coruscant and the Jedi Temple, which is awesome, and if you're going to notice the garb, that is the High Republic era Jedi wear. Now, the only character that we know of so far that is from the High Republic books is this green-looking person, Vernestra Rwoh. In the High Republic books, we see Vernestra as a younger Jedi Knight. When I say see, I mean read. But now we get to see Vernestra as a full-blown master. But the more important character that we're introduced to is Soul. Now, Soul is a Jedi Master whose former Padawan is thought to have committed the Jedi killings. We see Osha wake up on a ship, seemingly a different person waking up from a nightmare, and of course, in a different setting. And we also see that Osha is a mechanic doing very dangerous work usually meant for droids. And because Osha was the former Padawan of Soul, Vernestra approaches Soul about finding Osha. Soul convinces Vernestra to have him go seek Osha. Now the Jedi go arrest Osha, and of course Osha is now on a ship. Osha is on a prisoner ship, and of course the prisoners escape, but she does not. She crash lands on a planet, then has a vision about her sister. And of course, this is where the plot thickens. Soul had been able to convince Vernestra to have him go find Osha. And of course they do, and Soul saves Osha from falling. In that moment of their reunion, he realizes that she did not do this. It's what he suspected before, but with his connection to his former Padawan, he was able to sense that. Now, something interesting between this moment with Soul and Osha, and of course what happens in the Clone Wars with Ahsoka Tano being framed for murder. Soul senses it, he realizes that she didn't do it, there's a little bit of evidence, and the Jedi are like, yeah, cool. When Ahsoka Tano was framed, she went through an entire trial process. She had to break out of jail to prove her innocence. And she wasn't able to do it. It took Anakin to prove that innocence right before she was about to get a guilty verdict. Now, the important part about this is the difference between what the Jedi were like back then and what the Jedi were like during the Clone Wars. I think that was an intentional moment with the show to show what era we are with the Jedi. Now, this first episode was honestly okay. It wasn't great, it was okay. And the reason is it felt a little contrived. It felt like some of the moments were forced, no pun intended, and it felt like we set up a lot of cliche elements, like, of course there's an evil twin. And some of the characters felt like they fell into two-dimensional cliche caricatures. The show didn't stay that way, that's just how it felt in the first episode. Everything overall was good. The acting, the fight choreo, the setting, the graphics, everything was good, but it didn't feel like it gelled yet. Again, the main idea with this is it felt contrived and a little cliche. Now, the second episode definitely changed my mind with all of these ideas. In the second episode, we get May trying to off this other Jedi who's basically floating in a force bubble. And of course, we get introduced to Kamir, who is helping May in her quest. Now, anything with Manny Jacinto ever since The Good Place, I'm in. Now, at the end of the first episode, the final shot we see is the supposed maybe Sith Lord with the lightsaber talking to May. And we find out more about May's quest in this episode. May has to kill 4 different Jedi in different ways. And this all goes back to the home planet with May and Osha and what happened to the family. Now, what exactly happened is still a mystery. We only have elements. It involved 4 Jedi, there was a fire, and possibly May being the instigator. Now, the interesting thing is, May does succeed, but not because she manipulated the Jedi in any way, is that Jedi had regrets of what happened back then. He willingly took the poison to end his own life. Again, the plot thickens. Now, the Jedi, with the help of Osha, are trying to track down May. They do discover Kamir, and they actually trap him by Osha dressing up as May and getting him to admit to the crimes. But when he admits to the crimes, he also admits that there's another he, meaning a possible other master. They wait for May to come back, and Soul confronts May. And of course, May fails, and of course is surrounded by Jedi, and uses a essentially force dust storm to escape. And during that escape, Osha and May have eye contact, realizing they are both still alive. And from what it looks like, Osha intentionally missed with the stun gun. And I think Soul knows that too. And at the end of the episode, we get introduced to a Wookiee Jedi who is supposed to be one of the Jedi victims from May. Now, my overall thoughts with this episode is that it really started to find its footing. We started to get more time with the characters, and everything started to settle in versus feeling contrived. This episode started to add a lot of layers to what the first episode had set up. So now we start to have depth to everything, and we actually deal more with the characters in this episode. And with each episode comes new reveals. An interesting thing is that May does not really seem evil. She just seems misguided. I mean, like, really misguided because she's killing Jedi. But the term Acolyte is actually used in Star Wars quite a bit, but it doesn't mean a Sith apprentice, which I think a lot of people associate with. It actually just means more of a follower. Over the generations, there were a lot of different Sith acolytes who weren't necessarily even Force sensitive. They just did the bidding of the Sith Masters. So there's a good chance that May is not Sith or will ever be a Sith. An interesting little nerd aside is that during these couple episodes, they started to sprinkle in some of the Sith code, which isn't technically fully canon, but they're starting to sprinkle it in order to add that to canon. The Jedi code says there is no emotion, there is peace. The start of the Sith code says there is no peace, and they actually use that as a back and forth in the show. Now, where I didn't have the full confidence I had at the end of the first episode, I started to really develop that full confidence in the show by the end of the second episode. It's not that it didn't have contrived moments. Honestly, that is Star Wars. It's really that everything felt like it started to gel, the characters started to really find their own, and the storytelling started to find its own. Something I do appreciate about this show is that it doesn't fall into a lot of the traps that, say, mysteries often do. One of those traps being is that somebody is accused and they have to go on the run, and they're on the run for most of it. I do like the fact that the protagonists are working together from very early on. Some of those two-dimensional characters are still a little two-dimensional, but they're starting to have growth. So I really hope that growth in everything continues throughout the season. So to round things out, I would give the first episode an okay and the second episode good. To me, the show hasn't hit great yet. So this is definitely a show I say give it a chance. Don't judge it too early. Because if episode 2 was anything to be judged by, it means we're having progress and it could get a lot better. This is definitely one of those shows, because it's a mystery thriller, things need to keep unfolding. And if they continue to tell a compelling story with compelling characters, I think this will end up being a great Star Wars show. It had a sort of rough beginning, but it's starting to find its footing, and that I really appreciate. Thank you for joining me for this review of the Acolyte premiere. There are two sayings that they use a lot in the High Republic books. One is, for light and life. The other is, we are all the Republic. So to end this review, I will say, for light and life, we are all the Republic.